But first, a new report has warned that the British Army would literally run out of soldiers if they were forced to fight a war with similar casualty rates to the war in Ukraine. The House of Lords report says civilians need to be ready to fight because Britain's military, with just 75,166 regular troops, is simply too small. Now, they made a number of recommendations under the heading Army Size and Readiness. The House of Lords report said, while size is not the only measure of capability, the committee is concerned that the British Army cannot, as currently constituted, make the expected troop contribution to NATO or sustain prolonged conflict. The committee calls on the government to address recruitment and retention challenges and reinvigorate the reserves to help build up numbers. Caleb and Liz, as we were reading this afternoon, it becomes evident that this is not a problem unique to the British military. This problem is being experienced right around the Western world. There was a report in June that the Australian forces, at a minimum, require 69,000 troops. We've reached just 80% of that recruitment target. And of course, the federal government recently announced they would allow non-citizens to serve in the Australian Defence Forces for the first time. And I think there's numbers of reasons for this. I've come up with 5. I'll give you 3, and you can ask for the other 2 later if you like the first 3. But firstly, national identity is continually under attack in the West. And where there's a diminishing love of country, you're always going to have a diminishing number of people willing to fight for their country. Why would you fight for a country you're told is racist, sexist, illegitimate, and an oppressor? Third, immigration, I think, is a major issue, especially as it pertains to multiculturalism. We've seen protests on the streets of Melbourne and Sydney this week where you honestly start to wonder, are there people who, yes, they live in this country, but their loyalties lie elsewhere, and those loyalties would be tested in the event of conflict? And I'll give you one more. Western nations now are so committed to a welfare state, and a welfare state consumes resources that could otherwise be used and are badly needed when it comes to having a defence force that's capable of being a deterrent. As I said, I've got 2 more, but let me stop talking. What do you think?
Yeah, good idea. Look, I will say, though, you want to talk about welfare state. If you're looking for an opportunity to get free health care, a roof over your head, you're a young man with looking for something to do, the Defence Force is actually a really good place to go. They look after you really well in terms of that sort of stuff. And the problem, of course, is that if you're looking for people to sign up to the ADF or the force in Britain or any other country, you're not looking for 45-year-olds. You're looking for young people. I was going to say young men, but of course they don't just look for young men anymore. They want young men and women. But you're looking for young people. And it is young people in particular who feel the least likely to go and defend their country because their brains have been infected with all of this anti-Australian, anti-British, anti-Western sentiment. I mean, the IPA here in Australia did a survey a couple of weeks ago that found that of 18 to 24-year-olds, if Australia was in a similar situation to Ukraine, so you've been invaded and you are at war, only 27% of 18 to 24-year-olds said that they would stay and fight. 48%, nearly half of young Australians said they would flee the country. I mean, that's how much national pride young Australians have, because they're continually told that you're living on stolen land and it's illegitimate and we're racist and on it goes, and who cares because climate change is going to cook us all anyway. So what's the point in defending what is right? In order to defend your country, you have to not only believe in the land on which you live, you have to believe in the culture that you would be asked to defend. And that simply doesn't exist anymore. So why they can't be surprised that people aren't signing up to the Defence Force, because if you don't agree with, you don't believe in the ideals of your country, then what is there left to defend?
And I think immigration is a really strong point here, because especially in England, they have watched for years now their country be overrun by illegals or legals, and increasingly don't even recognise England as England anymore. I was just astonished by these numbers, because we're talking about a country who has twice our population. There's 56 million people in England alone, and yet we're told by this report the British Army is 75,166 regular troops. Is that all? They've got 183,000 on top of that, but then you're counting literally the admin teams, and it notes that only 80,000 of this number in total would be frontline combat, boots on the ground type troops. So when we're looking at the tenuous geopolitical situation that we're in on more than one front, this is hair-raising. And the fact that not only Australia but the UK, this is no better in America, trust me, they are also looking at terrible numbers in terms of recruitment, in terms of retainment in their military, right across, whether you're talking Air Force, Navy or Army. And you're wondering, how could you have let it get this bad? While pushing out all these kinds of policies and kind of directives from the top that do insinuate that, yes, this isn't a nation worth fighting for. We're seeing it in our very own top brass. We're seeing it throughout the institutions, like you say. The kids are like, well, why would I fight for this place? It's increasingly not looking like the country that I thought I was being brought up in anyway. And we're being told that we're some colonialist power that's got everything to apologise for.
And if you defend your country, you then end up being slandered as some sort of war criminal in the media, or there's a report written by the ADF saying that you should have your medals taken away. I mean, why would you put yourself up for that if everything that happens at war, and we know the fog of war is real, is going to be examined with a fine-tooth comb so someone can find fault with you? I mean, the Vladimir Putins and the Xi Jinpings of the world must laugh when they wake up every morning looking at the Western world going, look, because they have authoritarian countries, which necessarily mean that you will have a much larger army because people are indoctrinated to think that they live in the best country in the world. That's the way it works. There's no other way to disseminate information that would say that you're living in a bad country. But they go, look at the West. They are literally killing themselves every single day while our armies grow bigger. Hooray for us!
Right? That was going to be my fourth. To the teeth. But hey, we still have at least 75 more genders than them. So I'm sure they're really worried on that front.
If pronouns were a weapon, we would absolutely blitz any war.
We'd be winning on every front.
You raise a great point, and that is our national broadcaster is continually belittling our defence forces, even to the point where recently they've been accused of doctoring video to show our soldiers in a bad light. That's hardly going to encourage anybody to fight. I watched the ABC report of the protests yesterday, and honestly, you would never have known that the Israelis killed a terrorist. You would have thought he was some amazing, humanitarian. And then on top of that, trust in government is at an all-time low. And if you're going to go to war, if you're going to send your kids to war, you want to trust that the people making the decisions have got your best interests at heart, but instead they're trying to suppress our free speech. And finally, to your question, Liz, how did we get here? I think we've had a few decades of peace and prosperity where war was the last thing on our minds, and it's allowed all these luxury beliefs that only now we're realising have completely undermined the entire nation. And if ever we were in a tight spot, we suddenly don't have the wherewithal to defend ourselves.
Yeah, and the people in charge of making sure that this never happened have just let it happen en masse. This is across the West. These are the militaries that, should anything go wrong, we're all very much relying on.